Greetings, traveler. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 10 years now, and the other day I was having a conversation with a friend who really likes Street Fighter. And we were talking about how balance is interesting in games, and even though you can have imbalanced characters or characters who are too strong, you can still enjoy the game. That is a bit strange, I thought, because all players and game designers constantly strive for perfect balance in a game. But as we went further into the conversation, it became clear that actually, if a game was perfectly balanced, and he mentioned Street Fighter 3 as an example, which according to him was perhaps the most balanced game in the series, but one of the least fun in the series. So this is what I want to talk about today, how perfect balance can not serve us sometimes, and how we can keep things perfectly imbalanced or imperfectly balanced in a game and achieve a much higher degree of fun than we would otherwise. So let's just jump in. So today we're going to cover what is perfect balance in a game, how it's not necessary, and when we're exploring this not necessary part of the concept, how it's important to keep it in a frame so we don't lead ourselves too far away from achieving the fun that we want. So first of all, what would perfect balance look like in stats? So we talked about Street Fighter before, but I want to talk about a more generalized approach to this. So in this hypothetical perfectly balanced game, let's say you have many characters and they're all fighting with each other. This is a multiplayer game, and each character has things that they're good at and things that they're bad at, like most games out there. So in this perfectly balanced game, we have these three main stats: attack, defense, and magic ability. And this first character is very good at attack, less at defense, less at magic. Character 2 is okay at attack, not good at all at defense, but very good at magic. Now, why is this perfectly balanced? Well, balance, again, as I mentioned in the last video about how to approach game balance, is a very deep topic and you could really explore it from any number of angles. But for the purpose of stats, if we count how many points, so to speak, each of the two characters has distributed over their abilities, you'll find that they both have, seven points distributed over their abilities. So because both characters have exactly the same amount of points distributed, you could say that the situation between them is balanced. You can imagine how if the game had more characters, so character 3, 4, and so on, they could have a different distribution of these points. Perhaps one has 3 in attack, 3 in defense, and let's say just 1 in magic, for example. So this is our definition for this example for perfect balance. Moving to perfect imbalance, imperfect balance, we have a situation where the first character is exactly the same, and so is the second character, but the second character is not just a little bit stronger in magic, he's way stronger in magic. And even though this is already considered an imbalanced situation because the first player has 7 points overall, the second character has 11 points overall, you can still find fun in the interaction between these two characters. Now, how can that be possible? Well, it is enough to get balance close enough, usually without being perfect. And it's impossible to account for all possible circumstances of the conflict, such as player skill and player dislikes and likes in fighting style and stage elements, randomness, and so on. So I just want to put that out as a note when we're talking about balance. So it's not enough to examine the pure stats, the pure numbers around characters, abilities, and so on, but you really want to think about things in a more holistic way, I suppose. So how can it be that we can have this very imperfect situation but still have fun with it? Well, we talked about Street Fighter, but really you can think about war games, strategy games, games where you control entire armies, or games where it's less about the character, it's about the weapon the character uses, so sword users versus axe users or whatever. In MMOs, you could think about classes, like the fighter versus the thief versus the sorcerer or whatever. So this kind of relationship in balance between the characters can happen in any sort of environment. And we're still talking about multiplayer games in this video. So why does it not matter in this case that this character 2 is so much better at magic than the attack of character 1? Well, if you think about it, whether you have a character or a faction or a race or a class or whatever, you have your array of abilities. And usually all sides, all possible characters and factions and so on in the game, they also have the same descriptors, right? The same stats. So maybe a faction has a magic stat, but they are very, very bad at it. But they still have the same stat. What the game design is trying to tell you here is that, look, when you're using this character, if you rely on that character's attack value and you use it as much as possible, specifically in this matchup, then you should get the upper hand of the fight. This is basically all this game's design is trying to convey through this chart here, this presentation of stats. Conversely, for this character, we think that, okay, his attack is not completely terrible, but magic is what you want to be using. So when you get this matchup in a situation where you get to leverage your magic ability against the other character, then you should be getting the other hand. This is what this chart, this presentation of stats, tries to convey to the character. And of course, this doesn't always have to be the case. Perhaps the game is more about the attack delays or some other stat, but in a similar way, if that were the case, the game needs to make it clear through how it presents each character and its faction and each weapon and so on. So why doesn't it matter that this character is so much stronger in Magic? Well, because compared to the perfectly balanced situation where the stats are exactly the same, the meaning of the game and the meaning of the stats doesn't really change. Both in imperfect and perfect balance situation, these two characters are supposed to use the same stats in the same way. This character in the perfect balance situation is still supposed to leverage his attack rather than his magic, and this character still has to leverage his magic rather than his attack. So the fact that the magic stat here is much stronger in the imperfect balance situation doesn't really change the way these characters play. And as long as there's not a huge discrepancy in the power of these two characters, the fact that this character is stronger or just a little stronger in their preferred stat does not really make the game a negative experience. Perhaps there's a case where if this character gets 5 hits with his, let's say, sword attack, he will defeat the magic character, and the magic character only needs to get 4 hits or 3 hits with his magic to win. But that's fine, because perhaps this character has longer wind-up animations or something. So these stats alone are not a proof that the game is completely unbalanced, and certainly that it's not fun. So this applies, of course, to having different classes in the game, different weapon types. It doesn't only apply to fighting games, it applies to real-time strategy games and grand strategy games and so on. Each side, each character, each faction has something they're good at. The game is trying to tell you that as long as you lean into that, you should get the upper hand if the other side is not strong in that sense. That's what the game is trying to tell you. So this is how exactly you can have fun with this kind of system without sweating the details too much. But of course, as always, there's pitfalls with that, so let's go and explore them. The first pitfall is that even though a game is not imbalanced, it might come across as it is. So in this case, players usually say, this move that the opponent does always defeats me. There's nothing I can do, I have no counter, there's no way to get over this. If the opponent does this, I lose and there's nothing I can do. This puts the player in a place of hopelessness, and of course that's never fun. So why does this happen? especially when we already assume that the game is basically in a good balanced state, but the players perceive it otherwise. Well, this happens usually because the player is not aware that the counter tools already exist at the character's disposal. So this looks like this online when people are discussing what class and what character is weak and strong and so on. People will usually say, oh, this move that that player does or that class has is so powerful that, you know, it causes everybody else to lose a match against them. And what usually happens in that case is that a few days or maybe a couple of months later, somebody discovers, quote unquote, discovers another move that exists in the game that counters the super strong, supposedly, move. So the game didn't change in the meantime. There was no massive update to completely rebalance the game. That move existed in the game all along. It's just that it didn't draw anybody's attention. Nobody experimented with that move or that class or that ability long enough to know that it's actually the counter to this super strong perceived move that everybody complains about. Now, this is neither good or bad. It's just a situation that happens. And let's have a look at how we can solve the situation without imposing on what the players are experiencing and not having, of course, to rebalance the entire game with every such comment. So the solution I found extremely helpful here is to educate and illustrate multiple times, if necessary, that each enemy move can be countered. And not just the fact that it can be countered, you have to illustrate how it can be countered. Now, how can we achieve this? Usually this is done in a form of a tutorial, but it can also be said through the game's storyline, or it can be demonstrated when other characters or other factions in the game are in a similar situation. So it doesn't have to be the player themselves overcoming this seemingly impossible to defeat move. It could be somebody else going through this process in the game, and the player is simply there to witness it, and perhaps they remember it as a lesson going forward. If that's not available, then also through part of the game's tutorial, we can say that, look, these moves exist, this is the strong part of this move, but this is also the weak part. This is how you're supposed to counter it. And not just say it once, but say it multiple times in multiple ways, because player attention is at different points at different times. And then demonstrate. So have an enemy that specifically uses that move. Not just one time, not just in the very first tutorial and then never talk about it again. Keep demonstrating it throughout the game in many different ways and from many different angles. The players will not hate this. In fact, if you are demonstrating it in a different angle every time, the players feel that they learned something new about a tool that they already had in their arsenal, and that's, of course, always useful. So that's it on my thoughts on imperfect game balance. If you know someone who loves this topic, or if you know someone who's struggling with this topic, feel free to share with them. And if there's something I can say to illuminate this subject more, please let me know in the comments down below. So that's it for today, and until next time, have fun.